What started as an emergency became a sentence. Each year, the guest list grew, the requests multiplied, and the pressure mounted. Relatives praised Sarah's famous stuffing, but never lifted a finger to help. They drifted into the kitchen only to sample food or critique the turkey, vanishing the moment she asked for actual assistance. For everyone else, Thanksgiving meant laughter, football, and wine. For Sarah, it meant 12 hours of labor, sweat dripping down her back, and eating her plate of food cold, standing over the sink. The most cutting part wasn't the exhaustion, it was the dismissal. Her sacrifices weren't recognized as love, only as obligation. Her worth in the family had been reduced to rolls and gravy. And this year, her father casually handed her a list of 30 names, including strangers she'd never met, just 3 days before Thanksgiving. He didn't ask if she could manage. He assumed she would. But Sarah had finally reached her breaking point. Therapy had opened her eyes. She wasn't a helper. She was being exploited. She wasn't valued. She was used. And she was about to shatter the tradition in a way none of them saw coming. Before we dive deeper into this explosive story, let me ask you, have you ever been taken for granted by family or friends? Share your experience in the comments. Hit that like button if this hook already grabbed you. And don't forget to subscribe for more shocking stories of betrayal and poetic justice. What started as an emergency became a sentence. Each year, the guest list grew, the requests multiplied, and the pressure mounted. Relatives praised Sarah's famous stuffing, but never lifted a finger to help. They drifted into the kitchen only to sample food or critique the turkey, vanishing the moment she asked for actual assistance. For everyone else, Thanksgiving meant laughter, football, and wine. For Sarah, it meant 12 hours of labor, sweat dripping down her back, and eating her plate of food cold, standing over the sink. The most cutting part wasn't the exhaustion, it was the dismissal. Her sacrifices weren't recognized as love, only as obligation. Her worth in the family had been reduced to rolls and gravy. And this year, her father casually handed her a list of 30 names, including strangers she'd never met, just 3 days before Thanksgiving. He didn't ask if she could manage. He assumed she would. But Sarah had finally reached her breaking point. Therapy had opened her eyes. She wasn't a helper. She was being exploited. She wasn't valued. She was used. And she was about to shatter the tradition in a way none of them saw coming. Before we dive deeper into this explosive story, let me ask you, have you ever been taken for granted by family or friends? Share your experience in the comments. Hit that like button if this hook already grabbed you. And don't forget to subscribe for more shocking stories of betrayal and poetic justice. It all began with a broken wrist. Sarah was only 16 when her mother slipped on the icy driveway, landing in the emergency room just 2 days before Thanksgiving. Still groggy from painkillers, her mother reclined on the sofa and waved her daughter forward with a casual decree. "Sarah can handle it. She's been helping me cook for years." Helping, yes, peeling potatoes, setting the table, running small errands. But preparing a feast for 23 relatives? That was another matter entirely. No recipes, no guidance, no backup, just a teenager thrown into chaos. Sarah worked until her body gave out, tears spilling as she scraped burnt rolls into the trash at 3 a.m. Her hands ached, her back screamed, but by sheer willpower, she pulled together something edible. The turkey wasn't perfect. The sides were uneven, but the plates were full and no one went hungry. When the family gathered around the long dining table, forks clinking and mouths full, praise began to rain down. "Sarah did such a wonderful job. You're so lucky to have such a capable daughter. She's clearly got a gift for this." Her mother beamed with pride, as if she'd trained Sarah for this moment. Her father nodded with approval, declaring, "Next year, we'll let Sarah handle everything." Next year. Sarah sat at the table in silence, her body too exhausted to protest. The holiday had passed in a blur of ovens and timers. She'd missed the jokes, the laughter, the football game on TV. But the praise. Oh, the praise felt intoxicating. For the first time, Sarah felt seen, even if only for her usefulness. Being needed felt like love. And so the trap closed. The following year, there was no discussion. Sarah simply found herself in the kitchen again, expected to orchestrate another feast. Relatives began to associate Thanksgiving not with family, but with Sarah's famous dinner. By 18, she wasn't just a daughter or a sister. She was the unpaid chef of a 30-person restaurant. That first Thanksgiving, born from desperation, had planted the seed of a tradition. But what Sarah didn't realize at 16 was that she had just inherited a burden that would stretch across nearly 2 decades. As Sarah grew older, what had begun as an accident solidified into an unshakable expectation. And with every passing year, the pressure grew heavier, until her holidays became nothing more than 12-hour marathons in the kitchen. By the time Sarah reached her 20s, the Thanksgiving tradition was no longer a question. It was an expectation, silent, absolute, and suffocating. Each year, the guest list grew longer. Cousins married, children were born, friends of friends were added to the table. What had started with 23 relatives became 30 or more, but Sarah's role never changed. She wasn't invited to enjoy Thanksgiving, she was commanded to deliver it. Every fall, her phone buzzed with calls from relatives confirming dishes. "Sarah, you'll make your stuffing, right? The one everyone loves?" "Oh, and don't forget the gravy. You do it better than anyone." "Can you make a gluten-free version this year? And maybe something vegan?" It's not too much trouble, is it? They weren't requests. They were orders dressed as compliments. Sarah became known as the brand behind the feast. Sarah's stuffing, Sarah's rolls, Sarah's Thanksgiving. The irony was painful. She didn't even get to taste her own food while it was still warm. She ate standing at the counter, cold plate in one hand, sponge in the other, already cleaning dishes while everyone else laughed in the living room. The worst part wasn't just the exhaustion, it was the criticism disguised as care. "The turkey was a little dry last year, don't you think? Could you make the stuffing less salty this time? Aunt Marie's rolls were better, but yours are fine." Each comment sliced deeper than the last. She wasn't family anymore. She was service. And the logistics? They were overwhelming. Cooking for 30 people meant days of grocery runs, meticulous scheduling, oven space wars, and 12-hour marathons that left her body aching. Friends invited her to their own Thanksgivings, warm gatherings filled with laughter and shared responsibility. But Sarah always declined. I have to cook for my family," she'd explain, her voice flat. They'd look puzzled. "Why can't someone else cook, or make it potluck?" Sarah never had an answer. Because in her family, the answer was simple. It was her duty. Suggesting otherwise was treated like blasphemy. "But it won't be the same. You're better than anyone else. It's tradition." A tradition built on her exhaustion. A tradition that left her drained and resentful every single year. But traditions built on exploitation eventually crack. And one year, the family's lack of gratitude collided with Sarah's breaking point. And what followed would change everything. It didn't happen all at once. Sarah's breaking point built slowly, like water rising behind a dam. For years, she told herself it was fine, that the exhaustion was worth it, that the praise meant love. But cracks had begun to form in the illusion. 3 years ago, her cousin showed up with a brand new boyfriend. Sarah had never met him, but that didn't stop her cousin from handing over a list of his dislikes and allergies. "Can you make sure there's something he can eat?" she said casually, as though Sarah were running a restaurant. Sarah's jaw tightened. She suggested he bring his own food or eat what he could from the spread. The cousin gasped, offended. "Don't be difficult, Sarah. It's Thanksgiving. Can't you just do this one thing?" The following year, her brother's wife decided to go gluten-free. She didn't just want an option, she demanded Sarah prepare an entire second version of every dish. When Sarah explained that would double her workload, she was accused of being unsupportive of a health journey. And then came the final straw. Just 3 days before Thanksgiving, her father handed her a list. 32 people this year, he said with a shrug. A few extras. I told them you wouldn't mind. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the paper in her hand. 32 mouths, more groceries, more planning, more hours chained to the stove. I do mind, she whispered. Her father blinked. What? I mind. I can't cook for 32 people with 3 days' notice. His face twisted with confusion, almost disbelief. But Sarah, you've always handled it. What's different now? What was different? Sarah was 34. She'd spent 18 Thanksgivings in the kitchen while everyone else celebrated. She'd missed out on laughter, memories, her own life, while being treated like an ungrateful employee whenever she asked for help. But instead of hearing her, her father dismissed it with the same tired line. "It is just easier if you handle it. Everyone has their own traditions. This is yours." Easier, for them. That Thanksgiving was chaos. Sarah pushed through, but the weight was too heavy. She snapped at relatives, tears stung her eyes in the pantry, and she served dinner with a forced smile, pretending everything was fine. Her family didn't see her pain. Instead, they muttered about how she had an attitude problem. To them, the solution wasn't sharing the work. It was Sarah learning how to handle stress better. And in that moment, something inside her cracked completely. Exhausted and angry, Sarah turned to therapy. And it was there, sitting across from a quiet voice that refused to accept excuses, that she began to realize the truth. She wasn't being helpful. She was being used. January arrived, and with it, the heavy silence after another disastrous holiday. Sarah was drained, not just from the cooking, but from the weight of being told her exhaustion was her own fault. She needed help, but not from family. So she booked a therapy session. Her therapist listened patiently as Sarah spilled everything: the endless shopping lists, the late nights crying in the kitchen, the relatives who offered help, but vanished when it mattered. The therapist didn't interrupt, only asked one question when Sarah finished. "Do you enjoy cooking for your family?" Sarah hesitated. Once, long ago, she had. When she was just peeling potatoes beside her mom, it felt warm, even fun. But now, cooking had become a prison sentence. "Not anymore," she admitted. Her therapist leaned forward. "Then why do you keep doing it?" "Because if I stop, they'll be angry. Thanksgiving would be ruined. It would be my fault." "What if Thanksgiving was ruined?" the therapist asked calmly. "What would actually happen?" Sarah blinked. She had never allowed herself to imagine it. She pictured her family scrambling without her, frustrated, maybe embarrassed. But life would go on. People would eat. They'd figure something out. Her heartbeat quickened. For the first time in years, she felt the faint stirrings of power. Her therapist nodded. "You've been conditioned to believe that being useful equals being loved. But what's happening isn't love. It's exploitation. Love doesn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." The words hit like thunder. Sarah realized she had fallen into a cycle of people-pleasing, mistaking sacrifice for connection. She had been praised for being needed, but never for being valued. And now, the family wasn't grateful. They were entitled. In therapy, she learned how to set boundaries, how to face the guilt trips that always came, how to separate genuine help from manipulation. Week after week, she practiced saying words she had never dared speak. "No, I can't. That's not fair." By October, she had made her decision. This Thanksgiving would be her last. She would cook one final meal, announce her retirement from being the family's chef, and offer alternatives: potlucks, catering, shared responsibilities. But when the holiday drew near, and her father once again handed her a list of 30 names, something inside her shifted. The list was no longer just paper. It was a chain. And Sarah finally realized she could break it. The night before Thanksgiving, standing in the fluorescent glow of a grocery store, Sarah made a decision that would stun her entire family and free her for the first time in 18 years. The grocery store was packed, carts rattling against each other as shoppers filled their baskets with turkeys, cranberries, and pies. Sarah stood in the middle of an aisle, clutching her own overflowing cart. She had scribbled out yet another impossibly long list: 30 mouths to feed, multiple dietary restrictions, and not a single offer of real help. Her heart pounded. She could already feel the ache in her back, the heat of the oven, the sting of criticism disguised as suggestions. She imagined herself crying in the pantry again, serving dinner with red eyes while everyone else relaxed. And then a thought so sharp it nearly stole her breath. "Why am I doing this?" Her therapist's voice echoed in her mind. What would happen if Thanksgiving was ruined? Sarah looked down at her cart, piled high with food she didn't want to cook for people who didn't appreciate her. Her hands loosened on the handle. She walked away, leaving everything behind. That night, she picked up the phone and called her best friend from college. "What are you doing for Thanksgiving?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm flying to Portland to visit my sister," her friend replied. "Can I come with you?" There was a pause of surprise, then laughter. "Of course! But what about your family's big dinner? Aren't you supposed to be cooking for like 50 people?" 30, Sarah said, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. "And no, not this year." Booking a last-minute flight was expensive, absurdly expensive, but it felt less like buying a ticket and more like buying her freedom. She packed quickly, leaving her kitchen spotless and empty, as if to erase every trace of the role she had been forced into. The night before Thanksgiving, her father called. "Cooking starts at 4 a.m., right? Oh, and Uncle Bob's bringing his new girlfriend. She's vegetarian, so make sure there are plenty of options. Cousin Jennifer's kids are picky, so maybe some plain pasta too." Sarah inhaled deeply. "Actually, Dad, I won't be cooking tomorrow." A long silence. Then his voice hardened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not cooking Thanksgiving dinner. I'm going out of town." The explosion came instantly. Anger, guilt, panic. "You can't just abandon the family. 30 people are counting on you." "Then 30 people will figure out an alternative," Sarah said calmly. Her heart raced, but her voice was steady. "I'm done being the unpaid caterer." She hung up before he could respond. At 3 a.m., while her family expected her to be basting a turkey, Sarah was in an Uber on the way to the airport, suitcase by her side. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, she was free. But while Sarah was boarding a plane, chaos was brewing back home. 30 relatives arrived expecting a lavish feast, and instead walked into disaster. While Sarah settled into her window seat with a hot coffee in hand, her family back home was about to walk straight into chaos. At exactly 2 p.m., relatives began to arrive, buzzing with excitement and empty stomachs. They brought bottles of wine, store-bought pies, and their usual expectations. Laughter echoed through the house as coats were hung and football flickered on the TV. But something was wrong. The kitchen was silent. No aromas of roasting turkey, no clatter of pans, no frantic footsteps of Sarah orchestrating the feast. The countertops were bare. The oven was cold. "Where's Sarah?" Aunt Marie asked, setting down her dessert. Mom's smile was thin, forced. "She had other plans." The words dropped like a stone into a pond. Conversations stilled. Chairs scraped as people peeked into the kitchen, searching for some sign that a miracle meal was underway. "There's nothing started?" Uncle Dave demanded. "Not even the turkey?" "She left," Dad admitted grimly. "She said she wasn't cooking this year." Gasps rippled through the room. Cousin Jennifer clutched her picky kids to her side. "You're joking. She wouldn't just leave us." "She did," Dad muttered, face flushed with embarrassment. What followed was pandemonium. Some relatives rushed to nearby grocery stores, only to find them stripped bare by last-minute shoppers. Others tore through the pantry, unearthing dusty cans of vegetables and expired cranberry sauce. A few argued over whether to order takeout, but most restaurants were closed for the holiday. By 5 p.m., instead of Sarah's perfectly coordinated feast, the family gathered around a mismatched spread: store-bought turkey breast, instant mashed potatoes, canned corn, and frozen pies hastily defrosted in the microwave. It was chaos disguised as dinner. Children whined. Uncle Dave burned the rolls. Grandpa complained loudly that Thanksgiving had been ruined. Tension thickened as blame began to circulate. "Sarah abandoned us," someone hissed. "She's selfish," another added. But not everyone agreed. Sarah's cousin Mark spoke up, his voice quieter but firm. "I never realized how much she did. Maybe we took her for granted." That comment silenced the room for a moment, but pride and anger soon drowned it out. As Sarah's plane soared above the clouds, her family was unraveling without her. The day that had always run like clockwork under her care had collapsed into disarray. And whether they admitted it or not, every single person knew the truth. They weren't just angry at Sarah for leaving. They were angry because for the first time in 18 years they had to fend for themselves. But while the family pointed fingers and scrambled for food, Sarah was having the most peaceful Thanksgiving of her life, one that would open her eyes to what holidays were meant to be. While her family scrambled over canned vegetables and frozen pies, Sarah was sipping wine in Portland, her shoulders lighter than they had felt in years. Her friend's sister welcomed her into a cozy home filled with laughter, the scent of roasted turkey drifting through the air, not overwhelming, not frantic, just warm. The gathering was small, only 8 people, but every person contributed. One brought dessert, another prepared sides, and Sarah, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, wasn't chained to an oven. She simply placed a bottle of wine on the table and smiled. The difference was staggering. Instead of sweating in a kitchen while everyone else relaxed, she sat on the couch laughing at silly stories. Instead of wolfing down food while scrubbing dishes, she enjoyed her meal, hot, surrounded by genuine conversation. After dinner, they played board games and took a chilly evening walk, their breath rising in the air like smoke. It wasn't perfect. The rolls were a little burnt, the gravy slightly lumpy, but no one cared. They cared about each other. And Sarah realized something powerful. Thanksgiving wasn't supposed to feel like slavery. It was supposed to feel like this. For the first time in 18 years, she felt free. Free from demands, free from judgment, free from being reduced to nothing more than the cook. The guilt wasn't gone. When her plane had lifted off that morning, her chest had been tight with the weight of imagined disappointment. She had pictured her father's angry face, her mother's guilt-tripping sigh, the whispers of relatives calling her selfish. But now, sitting in a room where everyone pulled their weight, that guilt began to unravel. Her therapist had been right. The world didn't end without her cooking. Life went on. Her family had survived their disaster dinner, and she had survived choosing herself. By the time she turned her phone back on Friday, there were 47 unread messages waiting. Angry texts, guilt trips, accusations, but also something else. A few cracks of honesty. Her cousin Mark. "I never realized how much you did. I'm sorry we took you for granted." Her Aunt Linda. "I understand why you needed a break. We should have helped more." And her brother. "Mom and Dad are furious, but honestly, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." The shift had begun. Sarah smiled softly. For the first time, she felt the possibility of a future Thanksgiving where she was more than a servant, where she was a guest at her own holiday. But not everyone was ready to forgive her. As weeks passed, some relatives turned colder than ever, and Sarah was forced to confront which family members truly loved her and which only loved what she could provide. The weeks after Thanksgiving felt strangely quiet. For years, Sarah had spent the holiday season answering recipe questions, fielding suggestions for next year's menu, and listening to relatives gush about her food. Now, the silence was deafening. But it wasn't just silence, it was division. Some relatives flat out refused to speak to her. Angry texts had slowed but not stopped, each one dripping with accusation. "You ruined Thanksgiving. You abandoned us. How could you be so selfish?" These messages came from the same people who had never lifted a finger to help, the ones who had treated her kitchen like a buffet line. Others, though, reached out quietly. Her cousin Mark invited her to coffee. "I can't believe we expected you to do all of that alone," he admitted, shaking his head. "It's embarrassing we didn't notice sooner." Her Aunt Linda called too. "I've been thinking about it, Sarah. We should have helped years ago. You deserved better." The biggest surprise was her teenage niece. She sent a message that made Sarah laugh out loud. Honestly, it was kind of fun figuring out dinner together, like a survival game, except Uncle Dave burned the rolls and Grandpa wouldn't stop complaining. Sarah realized something important. People were revealing who they really were. Those who only valued her as a free chef were furious. But those who loved her as a person, not as a service provider, were starting to see the truth. Her parents, though, were the hardest. They felt humiliated, embarrassed in front of the entire family. Her father snapped during one phone call, "You made us look bad. 30 people showed up and left hungry. Do you know what that felt like for us?" Sarah's voice was calm. Therapy had given her new tools. "I wasn't responsible for your embarrassment. I was responsible for myself. And for the first time in 18 years, I chose me." Her mother sighed heavily, her words dripping with disappointment. "We never asked you to cook for everyone, Sarah." Sarah almost laughed. "You didn't have to ask. You expected it. Every year." There was silence on the line. Her mother finally muttered, "We thought you enjoyed it." "I enjoyed feeling appreciated," Sarah corrected. "I didn't enjoy sacrificing every Thanksgiving while everyone else relaxed." The conversation ended there, but Sarah could feel the cracks widening. Some relatives would never forgive her, but others, maybe enough of them, were finally beginning to understand. The next Thanksgiving would look nothing like the ones before. With Sarah's boundaries finally in place, her family faced a choice: adapt to a new way of celebrating, or lose her forever. 1 year later, the tension was palpable as Thanksgiving approached. Sarah wondered whether her family would invite her at all, or if they'd still be holding grudges. But a week before the holiday, her father called. His voice was quieter this time, stripped of the usual arrogance. "Sarah," he said, "we're doing things differently this year. It's going to be a potluck. Everyone's bringing something." Sarah blinked in surprise. "A potluck?" "Yes," her mother added, her tone softer than Sarah had ever heard. "We realized it wasn't fair. We'd like you to come as a guest, not as the cook." The words felt almost unreal. After 18 years of exhaustion, after tears shed in a pantry and burned-out ovens, they were finally acknowledging what she had been saying all along. That Thanksgiving, the table looked different. The food wasn't as polished. Store-bought pies sat beside homemade casseroles, and someone forgot the gravy entirely. But the air was lighter. Children carried serving bowls. Cousins laughed in the kitchen while chopping vegetables. Everyone contributed, even if clumsily. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, Sarah sat at the table from the very beginning of the meal. She tasted food that was still warm. She watched the football game with her brother. She laughed at her niece's stories. She wasn't a servant hidden behind the kitchen door. She was a family member, finally free. Some relatives still didn't attend. They preferred their perfect free meal, and couldn't forgive Sarah for disrupting the old system. But the ones who came cared enough to adapt. And in that, Sarah discovered who her real family was. Over time, the holiday evolved into something smaller, but warmer. Rotating hosts, shared responsibilities, and imperfect but joyful meals. Sarah still cooked sometimes, but by choice, never by obligation. And every year, she took her Portland trip too, a reminder that she had earned the right to rest, to enjoy, to live. Looking back, Sarah realized her rebellion hadn't destroyed her family. It had saved it. By breaking free from the role they forced on her, she forced them to grow. Those who valued her stayed. Those who only valued her labor faded away. And that was the truest gift of all. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is set boundaries. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. It's the only way to build relationships rooted in respect, not exploitation. What do you think? Was Sarah right to walk away from the Thanksgiving tradition, or should she have kept sacrificing herself? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories of justice, revenge, and transformation.